Have you ever felt like you knew what would bring you joy and meaning in life? We come to the book of Ecclesiastes, and this is a man who has tried it all. He's looking for meaning and satisfaction in life. Now, this is the fourth of our 5 books of poetry. You remember the first book was Job, and it looked like it was a book about the suffering of men, but it was really about the sovereignty of God. God is sovereign over man. And then we had the Psalms, where man was worshiping that sovereign God. We came to the Proverbs, where we had the wisdom of God given to man so that we could live godly lives in an ungodly world. Now we come to Ecclesiastes, and it's dealing this way, where we're looking for a life of meaning. And next week we'll look at the Song of Solomon, the last book of poetry, which is a life of intimacy. If you want to open with me, Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1, we see right off the bat that no name is given. It says it's the word of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. This is Solomon. It's pretty much agreed that Solomon wrote this, and as you study the book, you'll see that he was wiser than anyone else. He was richer than anyone else. Solomon is the one who was the son of David and king in Jerusalem. Jewish tradition says that Solomon wrote the first book he wrote, the Song of Solomon, when he was a young man. When he was a young man, he became king when he was about 20. And that was the time, remember, when God said, ask what you will, and he asked for wisdom. He said, I don't know how to rule these people. I need wisdom. And God was so pleased with that request. He said, because you didn't ask for honor or riches, I'll give you honor, riches, and wisdom. He wrote that book when he was young. He wrote the Proverbs when he was mid-age. Now, he was wise. He was the wisest man who ever lived. He was so wise that when 2 women came to him with 1 live baby and they both claimed it, remember what he did? He said, cut the baby in half, knowing that the real mother would say, she can have it. Wise man. He wrote the Proverbs in his mid-years, but the book of Ecclesiastes he wrote in his old age. And we know what happened to Solomon. God said there were 3 things that kings were not to do. They were not to multiply horses, gold, or wives. He did all 3. And it was the wives that really got him in trouble. God had said, if you get other wives, what will happen is they'll take your heart away from me and turn you toward other gods. And that's precisely what happened. So when we read this book, we have to first understand this is being written by a man who's not in fellowship with God. Understand it's a book of human reasoning. When Solomon got out of fellowship with God, the very thing that was his strength, his wisdom, became his weakness, because now he's relying on his own wisdom. He doesn't have God's. And so he's looking for meaning in life, and he's leaving God out of the picture. We have to be careful taking verses out of this book, because it is not once does it ever say, and God said. It's not what God said, it's what God says that man says. This is a book of human reasoning, looking for meaning in life. And his conclusion is that life is meaningless without God. Life is meaningful with God. 41 times in this book, God's name is mentioned, but it's always Elohim. Elohim is Creator God, that faraway, distant God. Never once is the name Jehovah used. Jehovah is that Redeemer God, that personal covenant-making, covenant-keeping God. That name's not used. So the problem for Solomon is that he's out of fellowship with God, and therefore God is distant, not near. He even says, God is in heaven, man is on earth. God is far away. All right, come with me to chapter 1, verse 2. And he says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Well, that doesn't sound very pleasant, and it really isn't, because the word vanity doesn't mean to look in the mirror and say, aren't I great? It means empty, futile, and meaningless. And the fact that he doubles it means he's saying life is empty, empty, futile, futile, meaningless, meaningless. He first says, and if you want to fill in your workbook, the first W, and there are a list of W's that he goes through, the first one is wisdom. And he is seeking wisdom. He's relying on wisdom to make him have meaning in life. But as we go through this first chapter, he actually knows something about science that scientists just discovered a few years ago, and he talks about it, that the rivers run to the sea, and the sun shines and evaporates the water, the winds blow it inland, the rains come down and it runs to the sea. But his conclusion about all that wonderful scientific truth in verse 8 is, it's wearisome. How monotonous. Life is just a bunch of cycles. The sun goes up, the sun comes down. And for that reason, in verse 9, the middle of it, he says, there's nothing new under the sun. He goes on to say, if you think there's something new, it's just because you have a poor memory. So all these cycles of science are just tiring to him. There's a couple other phrases, and you might actually take a marker and mark with different colors the repeated phrases in this book, because 37 times he uses the word vanity. He uses the word under the sun over 30 times. And he says, I said to myself, or I have seen. He says that a lot, because remember, this is a book of human reasoning. I said to myself. So in verse 16, I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. I set my mind, but he goes on to say, it was like striving after wind. There's just that picture of grabbing for something and you never get anything. And he goes on to say in verse 18, because in much wisdom there is much grief, increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. So his conclusion in all that is wisdom didn't do it. In chapter 2, he tries 4 more W's. You might write the next 2 in your workbook. The first one is wine, and the second one is works. And it's in chapter 2 where once more in verse 1 he says, I said to myself, I will test pleasure, enjoyment, but it too is futility. I said of laughter, its madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine. Okay, he's trying entertainment, pleasure, enjoyment. Think of the money we spend a day on entertainment. Billions of dollars. And yet he says, what does it accomplish? Now, I like to go to the games, and it's all fun, but if you're looking for your answers there, like Solomon, there was no meaning in it. The next thing he tried were works. Verse 4, I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself. I planted fruit trees and had ponds of water for myself. Did you hear something repeated there? For myself. Now we see another problem that happens when we're searching for wisdom and pleasure or wine and works. It's all for ourselves. And that was the problem. He's not looking for others or to others. He's looking for himself. It's all self-centered. So 2 problems he has. God is distant, far away, and he's living life for himself. The Christian principle is to get, you have to what? Give. To live, you have to die. And he hasn't found that. The next 2 W's he tries are wealth and women. In verse 7, he says, I bought male and female slaves, flocks and herds. I had silver and gold. I had the treasure of kings. I provided it all for myself. Twice he says myself. What he's telling us is, as far as wealth goes, money, he had it. He had the treasury of kings. Maybe he had jewels, crown jewels, and I assume that's what he had. He has all kinds of money. He has male and female singers. We'd call this guy cultured. He has his own opera company. He has his own art collection. And then he says, and the pleasures of men many concubines. So he has tried women. He's tried it all. But look at verse 17. Now right above this, he says there's a problem. We're all going to die. The fool is going to die just like the wise man will die. The rich man will die just like the poor man will die. And that really bothers him. So in verse 17, his conclusion is, I hated life. For the work which had been done under the sun. Now that tells us where this book is taking place. This book is not taking place in Canaan or Persia like our past books. This book is taking place under the sun, here on earth. This applies to all of us. This book is for all of us. He says it was grievous because everything is vanity and striving after wind. Verse 18, thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored, for I must leave it to the man who comes after me, and who knows whether he'll be wise or a fool. Verse 20, therefore I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored. He says not only does he hate life, he hates everything he has. Haven't these things become a burden to him? They're a burden because he's going to die and leave them to somebody else, and that ticks him. Because he's been wise and that person might be a fool. All his things have become a burden. And so he says he hated life, he hates his things, and he completely despaired. Poor guy. At the end of this chapter 2, verse 25, he says something interesting. He says, who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? Now that's a key verse. Who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? Now he's starting to realize life under the sun is meaningless without God. Who can have enjoyment without him? He goes on to tell us some other things that he has tried or looked at that have caused him to feel empty. And these are ours in your workbook. The first one is reality. And we see it in chapter 3, which starts out, there's an appointed time for everything. There's a time for every event. There's a time to give birth, a time to die. He says in verse 11 that he has made everything appropriate or beautiful in its time. Okay, so we now know we're in time. Time's not bad. There's the right time for everything, and that's good. Look at the rest of verse 11. He says, he, meaning God, has also set eternity in their heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning to the end. Down in verse 14 he says, I know that everything God does will remain forever, and there's nothing to add to it, and there's nothing to take from it. For God has so worked in men that they should fear him.